You know, one person who wouldn't be terribly surprised by that story if it turns out to be real is Paul Kimball. Now, Paul is a producer and a writer and well, let me just ask, Paul, do you, other than co-write, co-direct, and co-produce, you also co-host everything you do?
No, and hi, Ian, from Canada, from a tasty Canadian. No, the Ghost Cases series is the only one that I actually have been brave enough to appear in front of the camera. I'm usually quite happy, and so are the viewers, to see my work behind the camera. But
in this, Ghost Cases, which just debuted on Canadian television, you are the co-host for this.
Yes.
Okay.
A friend of mine, Holly Stevens, and I co-host the series. Yeah.
And so, what was your objective in doing a story on Canadian ghosts?
Well, it's not just Canadian ghosts. 8 of the episodes were filmed in Canada. 5 of them we actually filmed in the United Kingdom, in the Cheshire region around Manchester. So it's got a bit of an international flavor. And the idea was to do something a little different. I mean, there's an awful lot of ghost shows out there. Obviously, it's a popular subject. But our idea was to do less of, ghost hunting, as it were, and more of just 2 people, and they could just be any 2 people. They could be you or any of your listeners. It just so happens it was Holly and I. She has a science background. I have a history background, and we go out to these places where there are reported ghost stories or hauntings. We interview the witnesses. We talk to them. We get their stories, and then we say, right, all right, let's see if we can have anything happen to us. So it's really very much sort of and I come from a documentary background. It's a documentary series, and it's also an experiential look at the kind of thing that any of us can do if we find haunted inns or haunted forts or whatever. You can go in and do these sorts of things yourself. We also happen to have the typical tools of the ghost investigating trade, the EMF meters, the digital cameras, the audio recorders, and all of that. So there is the sort of scientific, or at least pseudo-scientific side. But at the end of the day, it comes down to whether we experience anything or not.
And that's sort of like a producer's worst nightmare, is to find out, to kind of leave up the main action of any television show to variables outside of their control, so that either if nothing happens, then they've got nothing to work with. So frequently on these ghost hunter shows, you can see the kind of the emphasis that the ghost hunters put on amping up the suspense for every little twig snap and every raindrop that happens outside. And in effect, it ends up, I think, in a lot of cases, kind of ruining their credibility because nothing happens. They keep whipping the camera around going, what's that? What's that? But it isn't anything. So what was it like for you when you would go to these places where ghostly occurrences had happened before and nothing happened?
In most cases, and I will say there were actually 2 where nothing happened. I mean, to us, one in which I'm convinced it was a resident of my old university, actually. I was convinced when I was a student there 20 years ago, and I'm even more convinced now that it's just, sort of legends that have been passed down. And so that just means instead of filming 13 episodes, you wind up filming 14 because obviously it is television, and if you get an episode like that, it's not going to make it to air, other than in the sort of season wrap-up where we revisit the best and worst evidence and some of the stories. And that one will make it in there where we say, look, sometimes you go to places that are supposed to be haunted, and you just find out there's a rational explanation for everything, and these things really are just legends. And not every house or place that's supposed to be haunted is haunted. The rest of the time, we actually, that's the nice thing. It's not totally reliant on us. Sometimes when people, I'm a firm believer, in the television industry, as I'm sure you know, Ian, people will often tell you talking heads are deaf. You don't want to see talking heads. But I'm a firm believer that when people are telling you compelling and interesting first-hand witness stories, that's good television. That's good anything.
I would disagree with this. This much I would say. Talking heads are not deaf. They're the most fascinating things on television if the talking heads are not actually connected to a body. That I don't think it gets any more interesting than if somebody were doing that. Now, so what did you find? What was the best case as you, Paul Kimball, co-writer, co-producer, co-host of this new series on Canadian television? What was the best evidence that you were able to come up with on your own that substantiated a previous ghost occurrence in a location, and where did it happen?
Probably the best one was the Algonquin Hotel, which is in St. Andrews, New Brunswick, right on the border with Maine. And there's a story there, real short, a bride about 100 years ago who committed suicide after her fiancé stood her up, didn't show up for the wedding. So she went up to room 473 and jumped out the window, fell 4 floors, and she's dead. And so we were there, we were investigating it. The hotel itself is very much like the hotel in The Shining. It's old and creepy and big like that. And nothing much had really happened. We'd had some EMS kind of fluctuations and stuff. But Holly and I do this segment in every episode we call Spook Hour, where we sit in whatever room's supposed to be haunted and we try and make contact, just the two of us. Nothing had happened there that night either, but every now and then I get a little feisty with the ghosts, and Holly, I was so feisty with this one, I basically asked her out, that Holly felt she had to go back. For whatever reason, we went and packed up the gear. She went back in as if to sort of apologize to the spirit if there was one there, and just decompress. And we had a DVR camera, a digital video camera, still running in the room. There was nobody else in the room. And Holly went over to look at the monitor. And the DVR camera, I'm not a big believer in orbs. I think until this point, almost any orb that I had ever seen can be explained through non-paranormal means. But I swear, it's in the episode which airs tomorrow. Out of the wall in front of Holly, literally the shape forms, and then this orb flies in I'll call it a light anomaly, flies in a straight line. Our camera picks it up right to the window where the bride would have jumped out. And that's weird enough. And then about a second or two later, and there's no one else in the room, Holly still doesn't know to this day why she turned around. She actually turned around and looked as if, and literally following the path that this orb took. And so there it is, on video. We showed it to some very experienced ghost investigators in the United Kingdom. They had 30 years between them, and they said it's the weirdest piece of video they'd ever seen. Truly anomalous. They couldn't explain it. And that's the kind of thing that makes me go,
That's tomorrow night, then, is when that particular episode of Ghost Cases airs?
Yes. Yep.
Tomorrow night. Okay, so here's what I want to ask. Paul Kimball, I want to put you on hold. I want you to hear some of the other stories that we have coming up, so I'm going to put you on hold right now, and then we'll come back to you coming up later on this hour, because I want to hear then about another one of your investigations as part of your series, Ghost Cases, which just debuted on Canadian television. Where we'll be able to see that particular video would be very cool. If we could get a link to that for our webpage, maybe coming up for tomorrow night or next week when George Norrie is on. And then also, too, I'd love to get a couple of your stories. Coming up next, several people who have been on hold already for Ghost to Ghost gets underway on Ghost to Ghost AM. This is Ian Punnett.